Hello everybody and welcome to yet another patch notes video here. We are back with 0.78 this time around, and as you guys can see from the banner, this is going to be the patch where Leanne is released. But we have a couple of things to talk about beforehand, so let's talk about some of the things before Leanne, and then we'll slowly make our way through 0.78. Okay, a pretty short patch change thought processes and direction for 0.78, so let's just speed through this as fast as we can because we'll talk about them later. Battle zone kills, of course, throughout 0.78 we're going to see more battle zone changes as in line with Season 8. A couple of rank changes as you can see in the second bullet point over here, and of course as it is Season 8 we're going to see even more items being added down the course of this patch. One of the bigger changes that we're going to be talking about when it comes to 0.78 is the battle zones. First, downed players are now going to be able to have an option of respawning like usual outside of a battle zone, or they can have the option to stay down inside of a battle zone, which means your teammate can actually pick you up. Of course, this is not going to apply for solos, but a very good option for you, especially if you're going for the battle zone win and you still have another team that you have to deal with after you finish fighting the first one. Next up, another big change that was mentioned before finally being added into the game. Basic attacks will now trigger the shuttle system overload. This is the big burst of damage that the shuttle took occasionally here and there from skills. Basic attacks will now trigger it, but that also means one thing will change about them, and it's the fact that a lot of auto attack stacking skills will not be triggered by hitting the shuttle. For example, assault rifle, you need to continuously auto attack using assault rifles in order to stack overheat and eventually proc it, but you will not be able to do that. And that'll be something consistent throughout every single one of these skills, so do make sure that you are going to be careful about this, and more things down the course of Season 8 will be added to make sure that it doesn't proc unless it is absolutely necessary. Just a small change to augments in 0.78, Healing Drone going to be receiving a nerf. Recovery per second is going to be going down from 0.2% scaling per level to 0.15% in the end. Not too big of a deal for Healing Drone. Has been seeing some uses in 0.77, so it will be nerfed just a tad bit in 0.78. And with 0.78, we're finally going to have Leanne join the roster of characters in Eternal Return. And while I don't have enough time to talk about Leanne in this video specifically, if you guys want to learn more about Leanne, I highly suggest you go check out the video that I'm going to be linking at the top right there for Leanne. It will be the Lumiapedia, where my good old friend Circadia recorded a lot of information about this character and the intricacies that she'll be bringing to Eternal Return after 0.78. And with every single patch notes, we're going to get a couple of characters discounted from price. This time around, it's going to be Ekion, Daniel, and Shukai. So if you guys want to buy these characters, this is your chance to do so. Other than that, let's start going through some of the character changes. Of course, the small ones we'll just try to breeze through as fast as possible, but I do have a couple of characters that I do want to mention here in 0.78. First of all, a buff to Nikki, Garden Reverse, more damage. A huge change to Tia here. Now, this change in general for 0.78 is going to reduce a lot of the hard crowd control or even things that just disturb other enemy players during a team fight, but instead convert that into much more damage that Tia is going to be able to utilize while keeping the fact that she still has some crowd control to move around with. Color mixing, red and blue, is going to be buffed. You do have less healing, but a lot more damage coming out of it, and something very similar for blue and yellow, just a damage buff overall. However, for Brushstroke, blue, you're not going to be hit airborne anymore if you get hit by the inner range, but a lot more slow if you do get hit by the inner range here instead. 90% for 1 second when hit with the inner range, only 5% when you are hit with the outer range. The damage, of course, also going to be buffed here, pretty consistent with everything, and the inner range radius will also be nerfed a little bit here as well. Vision reduction from red, also removed. Instead, you're going to be slowed for a little bit, and for yellow, a lot less utility for the slow there as well. So pretty consistent throughout the course of all the changes from Tia. A lot more damage, a lot less utility to completely make other characters very difficult to fight into Tia, but she will still have a lot of utilities to make sure that it's very difficult for other characters to actually catch up to her. Next up, Lennox will also see a little bit less damage reduction when dealing damage to more than 2 players. We're going to see a little bit more changes to Lennox in another section that we're going to be talking about later, but a pretty huge change when it comes to duos for Lennox. Lead Island, something similar to last patch, we're going to also see more cooldown being added onto Spirited Kick just to enable a little bit more mobility throughout the course of the fight, outside of basic mobility, of course. Mai, a little bit of a nerf here for the Catwalk, still a very strong character over the course of recent patches, so she's going to be seeing a little bit of a nerf. Mark is getting nerfed here yet again when it comes to basic attack amplification, a buff over onto Bernice, and for Bianca, even more healing when she lands her circulation. We saw something similar during 0.77, it's going to get buffed even more so during 0.78. I do want to touch a little bit on Celine here. This character has been very, very oppressive when it comes to, especially Korean regions, for some of our Celine players that are very well known in that region. Super, super difficult to zone control because of how much zoning this character has, and it's going to be hit quite a lot during this patch. The range for Plasma Bomb going to be cut by 1.5 meters, absolutely massive there. And Magnetic Compulsion, the bomb that you do hold on to will be exploding a lot faster, so you have to play around it as soon as possible. Shukai going to be getting even more of a buff here, going to be even having a lower cooldown when it comes to walk it off early, so more mobility early on. And Shuichi getting a bit of a buff here for himself as well. Ruthless cooldown going to be buffed, as well as Risky Business getting a little bit more of an amplification scaling. Suo was quite something in 0.77, a lot of utilization in team modes, and the main reason being was that her shield on top of healing factor was just really, really strong. So we're going to be seeing a little bit of a nerf here for Sua. Curious Case shield, as well as the memory version of it, will be getting nerfed. Cecilia, just less damage on her ultimate. You can't dodge it. You have to eat it. Well, it's going to do less damage. A huge, huge change for Sylvia. We've been seeing a ton of changes to Sylvia recently, and it seems like Nimble Neuron has gone through and done another quote-unquote rework on this character. This change overall just makes it so that you can rotate between your human form as well as your bike form a little bit more, with a little bit more of a reward on staying in the human form, making sure that you can rotate between the two a lot more freely, but also making sure that not all of your damage is only on the bike form or even all of the crowd control. We're going to see a lot of changes, including fuel received as well as the fuel gain overall in human form, and a lot of utilization and ease of access when it comes to the skills for the human form, and a lot more damage nerfs. Not exactly damage nerfs, I guess, a lot more of a power shift when it comes to her bike form. As you can see, all of her bike forms will not be eating any more fuel, but if we go down a little bit more, she will be eating a lot more fuel while she is on her bike, so limiting the duration she can stay on her bike, not making it so that her skills are the reason why she can't be on the bike anymore. This means that it's going to be very difficult for Sylvia's to rat, because you're going to be eating a lot more fuel per second just being on the bike in and of itself, and that means a lot of the damage from the bike you're going to have to be forced to use in a very, very tight window. Not exactly sure how all the Sylvia changes here are going to be kind of affecting this character, because her recent changes have made it so that a lot of Sylvia players have a lot of difficult time trying to adjust into her gameplay style. So very interested to see what 0.78 is going to be bringing for a lot of our Sylvia players worldwide. Let's keep going down the list. Adela will be seeing a little bit of a nerf here, a lot of damage on checkmate. We'll get getting slightly nerfed, not too much, but a little bit of a nerf there. Adriana will also be seeing a bit of a nerf because of her strong performance recently. Cocktail Party's base damage is going to be nerfed in the early stages of the game. Aya will be seeing a buff over onto Pistol for the skill lamp, and a bit of a nerf over onto Isol here when it comes to the basic attack builds, but for Semtex Bomb it will be seeing a slight buff over onto the amp scaling there. A bit of a nudge over onto Alex when it comes to damage, 10 damage overall for Gauss Pistol across the board there for him. And for Yan, just a small buff, although I say that, but Yan can make use of these cooldown buffs pretty well, so I'm not sure if this is going to be a small buff or a massive buff, but that basic defense is going to be absolutely huge for this character. Ekion, throughout the course of this patch, we'll also be seeing some nerfs here. He has been very strong with the recent changes to Death Adder as well as Black Mamba. We saw some envenomization changes, we saw some weapon changes. They're going to be scaled back a little bit here, but for VF Overflow, it's going to be envenomization cooldown is going to be increasing back up to 4.5 seconds compared to before. A little bit of a strong, I would say, buff that they gave, going to be scaled back a little bit for Ekion. For Emma, the hat trick will get a smaller hitbox. Yuki will be getting a buff here for himself. A lot of weakness being shown for this character during 0.77. Nimble Neuron will be buffing both the dual swords as well as two-handed during this patch. IRM will also be seeing a lot of power shifting for herself, scrapping some of IRM's utility while increasing the damage on skills that she doesn't mainly use as damaging tools, especially, for example, Perfect Pounce is going to be seeing a pretty big amp scaling buff for itself, a whole 20%, so maybe it's a little bit better for you to try using this skill as something that you do try to deal damage with as much as possible, and a couple of other small things that you will have to keep track of, especially when you're going through an all-out fight up against this character in fights. Theodore will also be seeing a buff over onto Sparknate cooldown for much more utilization. Fiora going to be seeing a bit more of a nerf, I think, overall, although it really just depends on how you tend to play this character, putting a lot more emphasis on making sure that you do hit the max touche stacks when it comes to Flash, instead of, just kind of using it whenever you really want to. So putting Fiora on a lot more of a skill check, making sure each individual hits of the Flash matters a lot more throughout the course of the fight. Piolo will also see something similar as well. Each individual skill very much heavily, utilized to actually deal damage instead of just continuously using it to gain stacks. We will be seeing damage buffs for both of the skills that are used to try gaining stacks for Piolo outside of fights. For Haze, just a small nerf, just to make sure that she's a little bit more controlled, because her win rates are pretty high according to the stats right now. So now let's start talking about some of the items here. Primordial Hex is going to be receiving a damage nerf for both the rare / epic and the legendary tiers, and of course that's going to apply for every single item / weapon that involves this specific subset of skills. Now let's talk about the actual weapons here. Pistol is going to be seeing some changes. Magnum Anaconda will be seeing a change from Lifesteal onto Omni-Siphon, and that's going to directly also affect Magnum Boa, because now Magnum Boa is specifically catered towards amplification characters, with its Lifesteal also swapping over onto Omni-Siphon here instead and gaining a little bit more ammo instead as well. Molten Malachite will be seeing a buff / a nerf. Basic attack range cut is going to be decreased a little bit, so you technically gain more range when you equip this item. And Vigor will be doing a little bit less damage in compensation for that. And a huge change to Kelty, I think that is going to be talked a lot about, especially during 0.78 here. The armor penetration going to be removed off of this item, and we're going to be seeing basic attack range being added onto Kelty here instead. So pretty massive when it comes to auto attack style builds. This is going to be a change that I think kind of sets Kelty on sights to being an item that really focuses on continuously kiting as a pistol character instead of just being brute force fights with the armor penetration stats instead. A small change over onto Axe, nothing too big to talk about. Similar things for Black Widow. Rapier will see a slight change over onto Eye of Argos, a slight buff over onto the Biotic Infusion on its weapon. We talked about Ghost Hand earlier on as well. It's going to be a bat transition and a pretty interesting recipe that we're going to be seeing for ourselves. It's going to be a branch as well as a force core. But the stats on this, a little bit on the weaker side. I will say the 10% cooldown reduction, pretty nice, as well as the Primordial Hex. But the stats on this, slightly lackluster. Although Magic Stick is definitely a lot more focused towards just brute force damage, you do end up getting Hex with Ghost Hand. So maybe for certain bat characters, we will start seeing this coming out. It's going to be more of an experimental phase during 0.78, but I would not be surprised if we do end up seeing a buff for this item. Some small changes over onto dual swords as well. Spring and Autumn going to be seeing a slight nerf here, 0.25 range cut from this item, but a huge buff over onto Lagura and Zar, a whole 6 skill amp being added to that weapon. Small change over onto the Hermit, nothing too big to talk about, but for the Moon, we're going to see a huge change. We're going to see a bit less of damage coming out because now we're changing the temporal refraction that the Moon had over onto Primordial Hex instead. So a lot of damage coming out from this over the course of time. And of course, for characters that run Arcana, you can proc this a lot over the course of the fight as well. So Hex can be absolutely massive for characters like Emma, for Bianca, or even for Adina that really likes to use this. Small changes over onto Shuriken, nothing too big to talk about. Same thing for Sniper Rifle, although we're seeing a lot more utilization for these range weapons when it comes to targeting cameras, other than Shuriken, because we're seeing a nerf over there. Plasma Whip will also be seeing a slight buff. Tonfa changes a little bit. Throw, same thing for the cameras. Bow, when it comes down to it, less attack power. And for VS Prosthetics, I mentioned earlier that Ekion is getting nerfed during this patch. It will be similar for the Death Adder, but this time around, it's going to be towards the item, not the character. Across the board, for every single Death Adder variant, we're going to see the basic attack amplification scaling reduced from 2% to 1.6% instead for every single one of them. Let's go through some of the armor pieces quickly now, since there's not too many changes here, except for a couple important ones. Chest piece, a small nerf over onto Covert Agent Uniform. A head change is going to be going over onto Diadem, a slight buff there, and Racing Helmet also seeing a slight buff. Some changes over onto Arm, and we're going to be talking about one massive thing here, but before that, let's quickly talk about Auto Arms losing Skill Amp, so very much focused onto the auto attack and the defensive part of it. But to compensate for Skill Amp being reduced out of a Force Core Arm transition, we're now going to have Dragon Scale. It's going to be building out of Squad Leader Armband and a Force Core. And would you look at the stats? Absolutely massive. A whole 15 defense, which is quite massive for Amp characters. 86 skill amplification. I think that's going to be pretty massive for some characters across the board. And especially this stat right here might not look like too much, but in a world where we live in a lot of amp-based characters that use a lot of skills, very useful to even have 2% skill damage reduction. So I think this item is going to be very important for a lot of amp characters that wants to completely specialize towards building a lot of amplification, since there are a lot of other good cooldown items that you can build outside of Tyndalos Monarch or Prominence. I think Dragon Scale is going to be really good as long as Force Core can be utilized on those kind of characters. A buff over onto Cube Watch, Electric Shock just going to be doing more damage. And for accessories, we have some small nerfs and buffs across the board, but a huge buff over onto Eye of Horus again from the looks of it. Although I will say, Eye of Horus seems to be at a slight disadvantage right now because Season 8 has mostly been a whole team mode style of season. So a lot of people opting to build for much more totem-sided of things instead of the Eye of Horus, both building out of Tree of Life. Both really easy to build, so a little bit unfortunate there for Eye of Horus. We will be seeing this item getting buffed more and more until it becomes an item that almost feels like it's out of control. Now, this is going to be a section that I usually don't do, but this patch specifically has a lot of massive changes, so I'll talk about it real fast. Hamburgers now will spawn will spawn 2 instead of 1. I'm sorry about that. And it'll be healing a little bit less. But the fact that it spawns 2 now is going to be absolutely massive for early game when you just use the bread and get some meat from chickens and you instantly craft it into hamburgers to lower down the amount of inventory space that you have, as well as have some good sustainable food. Hot Ramen will now spawn 1, but instead it'll actually give you a very good pathway into building 3 Garlic Ramen with a buff into the HP regen. And for 11 Combo Meal, you will also see a slight decrease in the HP regen you get out of that specific food. Next up, we're going to see a bit of a tutorial revamp for some of our miscellaneous changes here. As the game slowly but surely creeps towards the official release, we're going to see a lot of changes that are going to be catered towards new or returning players. So a lot of changes towards tutorial. We've been talking about this, as well as the devs have also been talking about this for quite a long time now. And it seems like 0.71 is going to be the first step to making sure that we have an adequate tutorial for Eternal Return that is going to be made for new players and a lot more simple to understand. And of course, throughout the course of Season 8 as well as Season 9, more and more things are going to be added to this. So if you want to make sure you check on the tutorial, whether you're a new player, an experienced player, or even a veteran, just to see if anything interesting could be learned from this, I do highly suggest it. Nimble Neuron has been putting a lot more time into this, so maybe worth a look at this point as well. Next up, we're going to see a little bit of a change for the rank side of things. The rank ladder will now be getting the mithril tier, as well as some improvements over onto the ranked points, because 0.76, 0.75, and even 0.77, a lot of players were definitely complaining about their LP gains throughout the course of those patches, so we're going to be seeing even more points for successful games. Despite having some LP losses still be something similar that you saw in previous patches, as long as you have a good game, you should be able to see a lot more benefits coming out of it. Of course, just a mithril tier, just to touch on that as well. We're going to be adding that in between Titan as well as Diamond to make sure that there is a little bit more of a spread for players when it comes to the rank distribution across the board. As for new skins coming out in 0.78, we will be seeing Laura's skin, Underworld Org Laura coming out for her. And for Alex, we will be seeing Private Eye Alex releasing in 0.78. One other skin that we do have currently ongoing right now is the Eva skin that we are getting with the Valentine's event. And in my opinion, one of the best skins in the game of Eternal Return right now, so make sure you guys partake in the event as often as you can to get enough candy and hearts for Eva's skin for free. And that is going to be the end of patch 0.78. Compared to 0.77, I think this is one of the few patches that I think I've been very interested in seeing how it actually occurs live, because there's a lot of changes throughout the course of this patch that really intrigues me to see what the results are going to be for the characters that are individually affected, but also characters that are going to be indirectly affected as well, not just the characters that get weapon changes or the characters that physically get themselves changed, but other characters that kind of have to deal with those changes. I want to see how those characters are going to deal with some of the changes in 0.78 as well. Something that I also noticed throughout the course of this patch was a lot of these changes kind of based off of the Korean competitive side of things. I think one of the biggest things that I remember seeing going into this patch and even during 0.77 was a lot of Ekion and Sua combinations being very oppressive, which we did indeed see in Korean competitive for ERM. We did see both of those characters getting scaled down for pretty much everything that was problematic about them in 0.77. Ranked LP loss, I talked about that earlier on as well. A lot of my friends have been sending me screenshots about some pretty crazy LP gains and losses that they've been noticing throughout the course of 0.77. So hopefully 0.78 is finally the patch that we do see a little bit more of a balance between losing LP as well as gaining LP. Battlezone introduction definitely kind of skewed the odds in losing LP a little bit lot more, thanks to the fact that kills in general got inflated overall, but hopefully 0.78 should be a little bit more of an offset to make sure successful games are a lot more rewarding than the ones that losses are. Overall, though, I will say this patch in general, I didn't really see anything too problematic. Again, I will reiterate, I saw a lot more things that were intriguing to me, and even if they did raise my eyes a little bit about some of those changes, again, I was more intrigued to see how that was going to affect some of these matchups between characters more so than, oh, this is a patch change that I really do not want to see. Something like I said during 0.7 with some of the character changes, I don't really see that here in 0.78. So, overall, I will give this patch a rating of 8 out of 10 personally myself, but of course, as always, what really matters is what you guys think about this patch. Of course, I'm going to link this patch down in the comments below, so make sure you guys check it out, and let me know down in the comments below what you guys also want to tell me about 0.7a and what you guys personally think about it as well. Other than that, I will see you guys at the next video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Have a good one.